Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Alright. I'm Seth.
I'm Sid.
I'm Richard.
Mike. I'm Blue.
I'm Lou.
Today we'll be going over the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in relation to poverty. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of the history. So basically, there's a large pattern that's throughout the history of people taking over the Democratic Republic of the Congo and exploiting its resources and its people to give themselves wealth. So the first example is King Leopold II in 1885. He enslaved millions of people and basically extracted a lot of rubber and ivory and gained huge amounts of wealth from that. 1908, other countries got involved like Belgium, but basically they just did the same thing, extracted wealth, minerals, and just gained their own power and wealth without helping the people of Congo. In 1960, they were an independent country, but they had such weak institutions and such high poverty rates that they couldn't really be independent, and it was basically just, other groups, other neighboring armies taking over and just basically abusing the people and extracting wealth. Mobutu Sese Seko was a dictator who took control, and he was absolutely terrible, just continuing the pattern of extracting wealth and, keeping the wealth for himself and not the people of the Congo. And the USCRI, which is the U.S. Committee of Refugees and Immigrants, says that this is one of the world's longest humanitarian crises.
Yeah, I saw something specifically about like the Dutch people when they took over. It was pretty much just the king himself who owned it, and he really just didn't care at all about the future of the country, so he just made sure it was profits over people essentially the entire time. So it was pretty terrible under his reign, and I saw that like even other countries like France and Italy, and they were like essentially saying that's like super terrible, like we're doing bad things in Africa, but like you're doing it even worse. So
Yeah, I definitely see that. And like you brought up like the future aspect of what it is now, and it's definitely visible in the poverty in the country because it never really left. I think it just kind of continued to grow worse because in a academic journal for Cambridge by Gil Shapira, she wrote that 70% or like 90 million Congolese people are currently living under $2 or like 5,000 Congolese francs a day. And that's like an insane amount compared to how big of a country it is.
Yeah. No, there's a specific, I think one of the issues is that they just their infrastructure is so poor. And one issue was that in 1960, they only had 16 people who were like educated above university, which is pretty insane.
Crazy low.
Yeah, no, they had like 15 million. Yeah, no.
I think one of the big issues that kind of like has led to like the poverty crisis, like just having like just been so long and it's still going, is because the DRC's never really had a self-sustaining, stable government, because we know, like they were colonized and they were under European rule for such a long time, and they couldn't govern over themselves. And then once they finally did gain independence, they just went through cycles of just corrupt leaders, and then because of that, there's not really been any focus or effort into decreasing the poverty level, just because the government hasn't been active for the people.
I also think it's crazy that the Congo literally is sitting on trillions of dollars of natural resources, and going off of the exploitation and the corruption. Actually, the DRC is in the like top 20 for the most corrupt countries in the world, and it just goes to show, because the trillions of dollars of natural resources that they're sitting on is obviously not going back to the people where it should.
Well, and so I think what the current president is Tshisekedi, Tshisekedi, whatever his name is, and so he's been in power for around, I want to say, 5 or 6 years, and really what he does every time an election comes up, which I guess I say every time, it's only been one, but so he's known to toss around bribes, and he doesn't really focus on infrastructure all that well, which, like Richard said, if you don't have roads and you don't have electricity and you don't have water, like things cannot get better at all. And then they don't have schools. And I want to say, I think it was an Al Jazeera article by Shola Lowell, and it said like 80 million people are. Yeah, 80 million people are in poverty, and like 80% of children just go uneducated generally. So that's kind of
crazy
nuts.
statistic.
Yeah, I have a specific organization that helped a man named Samuel. Let's get the organization name right. It's the Plant with a Purpose, non-governmental organization that helped Samuel the farmer. He essentially had a ton of land, but the issue was he didn't really know how to crop or rotate your crops, so all of his land just wasn't fertile for the things he was trying to grow. And so what Plant with a Purpose did is they came in and actually taught him to plant trees so his soil would regenerate. And then even after 2 years of having planted trees and crops together, his crops, he just made so many more crops essentially.
Yeah.
Because his soil was actually
Better yield.
useful.
Yeah. So you were saying Samuel, he was at first he didn't know what to do with his land, but it turns out that he's actually one of the more fortunate Congolese people, because right now there's an ongoing conflict, and this has been going on for such a long time between the Congolese, and then there's rebel groups such as M23. They're financially backed by Rwanda, which is the neighboring country. So they the eastern part of the Congo is just being torn up by war right now, just because there's just a few very valuable things. Like Blue was saying, the Congo has so much natural resources, so much money in there, and then they do have a lot of fertile land, but the problem is that nobody really has a firm control over it, much less the government, because their instability means they can't really control anything. So that just leads to conflict between different groups of people, which is fueled by the fact that there's so many impoverished people that are just desperate, trying to get something that'll bring them out of poverty.
Yeah, and going off of that, it so happens that most of the mining operations happen all in the eastern part of the country. And the mining sector is the DRC's main source of revenue. So I just think that's crazy.
And then I was looking over a story about this man named Glissane. So he is a father of 5, but he's also a worker in the mines. And even though the mines, specifically the cobalt industry, generates billions of dollars, none of that money actually goes to the miners themselves or stays within the DRC. And the reason for that is because in the past, the government of the DRC, the federal government, they have not been able to hold control over their natural resources, which resulted in many foreign nations and organizations and such coming in and taking over the mining industry. And they've held on to that today just because, since there's so much money, they don't want to give up their power. And so what that results in is that the miners are just constantly being exploited. Glissane, he says he makes under, it would be $2 per day. He talks about death is not an uncommon thing in the mines. There's so much inhumane conditions that leads to malaria, birth defects, just so much problems within the working environment, but they still have no choice just because they're so impoverished that they need to have something in order to survive.
Yeah, and alongside just the mining with all the inhumane aspects of it, there's a lot of danger for injury or death in there, and the healthcare system can't really stand up to help those who get injured in the mines. because they don't receive a lot of funding from the government. A lot of it is kind of out of pocket by the citizens that go there who need it. So when you're living in poverty, you don't really have the money to go to the hospital as frequently as you might need to, or get the treatment you need. So working in the mines, being impoverished, which is the case for many who work in the mines, it always has like a bad outcome to it.
For sure.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues is just bureaucracy. Like their just execution of their laws and stuff is just super weak because of the corruption everywhere and foreign interest, like he said. There's just so much, like, they just don't have control over their nation, and it's kind of hard when not many of them are educated, and so because the infrastructure is poor, it's just like a cycle of keeping people in poverty.
Yeah.
So one thing that I know the UN Habitat is trying to do, they have a portfolio of projects. It includes a land reform support program. They've actually invested $7 million into that program. I think it's their biggest program that they have for that. But also a slum upgrading project in the Masinda district that has $350,000 going to it. And I think the goal for that is to try and reduce poverty in the outer regions of Kinshasa, which is the capital. And in doing so, that will hopefully reduce poverty migrating into the city itself.
Yeah.
Because some of these statistics are crazy. The population of the DRC is going wild. It's supposed to increase, or it did increase 95 million in 2022 to 130 million in 2030. And going off of there, 133 million and 191 million between 2030 and 2040, and finally 191 million to 278 million in 2050. So they're experiencing crazy exponential growth, but the problem is the government, like you said, has no infrastructure policies or anything going into it.
Poorly managed.
Yeah, it's just very poorly managed.
I do.
Go ahead.
After me, I guess. But I do want to mention, because I know education has been brought up quite a bit, that I want to say it's the World Bank has invested around 800 million into the education system, so that goes to, I think it is just straight up free education. And so right now, that is, or at the time of the article, that has gotten 4.5 million kids into free education, and with plans to expand, see how that goes. But for the record, there is some investment into
That is
education
good, yeah.
going on. So
So like Mike said, there are many different organizations are investing money into the Congo, and what that has resulted is just because they all see that the Congo is such a big problem with poverty, and then as a result, many different foreign governments such as the U.S. and foreign organizations are sending them aid. So, for example, in 2017, the DRC received $525 million from MONU, which is the UN's peacekeeping mission in the DRC, as well as from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. From the World Bank database, that's where that number comes from. And so they're giving the DRC all this money, and then the hope is that with this money, they're able to grow their economy and adopt a more neoliberalism system in order to grow and compete with different countries around the world. But the problem is that since the government is so corrupt, the government is receiving all this foreign aid, and they're not using the money to solve poverty or grow the economy. And that makes the problem worse, just because it gives the government all this power and just widens the gap between the government and then all the impoverished people. And then this just continues in a cycle, because the gap widens and poverty is not solved, so they get more foreign aid, and then the government just keeps it, and then it keeps going.
Crazy.
No, there's a big, one point I want to touch on is there's a big difference between rural experience and urban experience.
Yeah, sure.
In rural areas, only 1% of people have access to electricity compared to 31% in urban areas. And actually, unfortunately, neither of them have reliable, even in cities, access to electricity. But yeah, there's just such a wide gap between it. And it's also an issue because people are then leaving the rural areas to go to the urban areas to go to places like Kinshasa, their city capital, which is supposedly going to be the biggest in Africa by 2030.
Really?
Yeah, over like Cairo and Egypt even. So
Wow.
yeah, so and they can't really support these people in Kinshasa because there just isn't infrastructure to support it. Yeah.
The DRC also suffers from a phenomenon where Kinshasa is, I think, just so disproportionate to every other type of like urban environment in the DRC.
Yeah.
So it's like they put all the eggs in one basket, and that's Kinshasa, and
Mhm.
everybody else is suffering from it.
Yeah.
And then the problem with that is like, I think sources kind of say that like, even though Kinshasa is like, when you look on paper, it has like populations comparable to like Cairo and Egypt, but then if you actually dive deeper into it, only like a very small portion of the city is actually like has like suitable infrastructure, and then the rest of the population is just based off the fact that there is so much slum just around the city.
Yeah.
The city.
I would also ask, just on a side note, and I don't know if we have like a statistic for it at all, but if all those people are moving to Kinshasa, then I'd imagine food production probably also goes down.
Yeah,
They're not,
for
you know,
sure.
if they're not using that land that they actually can use.
Yeah, that's a big issue. There's a lot of like, especially climate change has caused a lot of issues in agriculture because it's caused droughts, which makes people move away, and then the poor like governance leads to people claiming land, like having overlapping land claims.
Yeah.
And so you can't even own your own land, and then people are like displaced internally, and then they want land and they can't get land. It's just a big issue, and also just like the crop rotations and like the unpredictable weather patterns due to climate change has really caused an issue with agricultural production.
And then all this kind of just like all the problems within like not having enough food, inhumane working and living conditions, like inadequate access to healthcare.
Yeah.
The education system is not where it needs to be in order for the DRC to grow as a country. That this all kind of ties back into the DRC, like the poverty level just prevents them from just having growth and change into different sectors of their country.
Yeah. Until it gets that change in funding for whether it's healthcare, education, and the food, then it's just gonna keep on just like a cycle pretty much.
Yeah.
So does anybody have like a solution like that they might propose?
There was, the UN Habitat had a solution. It was kind of more focused on housing, really, because they investigated, and what they found was the centralized and decentralized providers for the residential districts, they just didn't follow regulations at all. So there was a lot of just like things that they didn't know existed, but also things that were supposed to exist that didn't exist. So
Yeah.
one of those things was, let me find it here. Yeah, the DRC has a housing deficit of 4 million units.
Wow.
And if they were going to bridge that gap, they would need to build 265,000 units a year.
Wow.
So they have a major housing deficit right now.
Yeah.
But they have implemented some housing and urbanization policies already to try to get these regulations like on track, so people, well, it doesn't turn into what that was.
Yeah.
Like 4 million units.
Yeah.
A deficit,
Yeah.
but that's pretty much the only thing I've seen from the UN Habitat's plan so far.
I would say that I think kind of the stem between all these problems is their government has no stability.
Yeah.
And all like the people who have been in power and are currently in power are in some ways corrupt. Yeah. So I think the solution has to start with
The top.
Yeah, it has to start up top.
Yeah.
There has to be stability within the DC, whether that be like somebody who comes to power and is an actual leader for the country and for the people, or whether like there's like foreign interference, whether that be governments or like maybe
The IMF just supersedes all government.
yeah, something like
Yeah.
that.
At least they get money, but
But I think stabilizing the government would like reverse. It would take time, obviously. But
Yeah.
it would reverse all like the negative cycle that's currently going on. So like the foreign aid would start going into the problems and start creating solutions like access to education and healthcare. It would, in some ways would stop like the conflict over, like the valuable resources that the impoverished are trying to use to get out of poverty. And then also it would give the DRC control over their mining rights, and that the massive amount of wealth would greatly improve the country's standard of living and their economy.
Yeah. I think that's been 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's pretty
I
good.
think that's been a long time. Yeah, we're at 20. All right.